There will be a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, and we can answer your questions then. We'll also unmute your microphones so you can actually ask us the questions during that time. The webinar is recorded, and the presentation will be made available after the meeting. If you can complete the critique at the end of the session today, we'll appreciate that. And if you are lucky, you might even get a call from me trying to explain any questions you might have for us. Okay, so I'd like to move on with the agenda. So what we are going to cover today is we're going to give you an overview of the business propositions around the cloud and why people are moving to the cloud. Then we're going to dive into Windows Azure, and then we'll cover what does Bytes offer in terms of cloud services and everything we do around hosting, storage, DR, etc. Finally, we will cover some customer case studies so you can feel confident of what we're saying, and you can see what we've done for other major customers in the UK. And finally, we finish with a Q&A session. What I'd like to do now is to pass you over to Dan, who will go through the agenda. Dan?
Excellent. Thanks very much, John. Afternoon, everyone, and thanks very much for joining. Without any further ado, I will kick off. I'm not going to bore you for hours with a very deep overview of what cloud is. I'm sure most of you have heard it before, but I thought it'd be nice just to sort of focus on 4 key areas, just so that we've all got an idea about what we're talking about here today. I think one of the most important things about cloud, and frankly one of the things that scares some people, is the fact that pooled resources are at the absolute core of everything that is cloud. So although whenever you're deploying things onto cloud, your particular environment is private and isolated to you, the reason that these vendors and Microsoft and the other cloud vendors are able to offer the cost efficiencies that they are because of the size of the data centers that they operate, and because they can actually provide balancing between perhaps operations that you're performing and operations that other customers are performing. And by doing that, they're able to actually utilize their hardware far more effectively than if each customer was on their own dedicated physical environment. The second sort of key tenet to cloud is self-service. I've got a fairly strict rule when it comes to cloud, and that's if you've got to speak to someone to get something done, it's not a cloud service. One of the real guiding principles behind cloud is that everything should be automated, everything should be online. If I want to provision new service, if I want to provision new storage, that should only be a couple of clicks away for me. The next piece, which I think is really important as well, is elastic-based hosting. So if I want 10 servers today and I want 100 servers tomorrow, I shouldn't have any penalty for that. I should just be able to consume and pay for exactly what I use, which then leads into this last piece, which is around usage-based economics. So we can now start to think of the cloud and IT in general just as a utility which we can pay for as we need it, consume, and then switch off once we're finished. What this ultimately delivers are 3 key things. One of them is economies of scale. Vendors like Microsoft are buying hundreds of thousands of servers at a time. The economies of scale that they can get when you're purchasing that many servers are pretty impressive. Agility, the fact that I don't have to wait for hardware to be provisioned anymore. The fact that I can just log onto a website and have that server available to me 5 or 10 minutes later. And finally, for you as businesses, it's all about focus. You know, what within your business is your special sauce? What is the bit that really differentiates yourself from everybody else out there in the market? And if IT is not one of those things, or perhaps some of your IT does not fall into that bucket, it's not something that you should be running yourself. It's something that you should be pushing out to cloud vendors. So if we look at the spectrum of cloud services which are out there at the moment, anyone that's been on a similar webinar to this will, I'm sure, have seen a similar slide. And what we're seeing is a real evolution in the way that IT is delivered, away from physical on the left, so servers which we actually have to buy, own and maintain. Virtualization was the big thing a couple of years ago, and how can we start to divide up those physical servers within our own data centers and get better use out of them. But what we start to see as we come into the cloud are these as a service models. So infrastructure as a service. If I just want to be able to spin up servers, on somebody else's platform, I should be able to do that quickly and simply and cost effectively. Moving up towards concepts such as platform as a service, where actually I don't need to think about physical servers anymore. All I need to think about are applications that I'm building and delivering, right the way through to the final end of the spectrum, software as a service, where I'm actually just consuming finished packaged goods from vendors, typically on a per user, per month basis. Now, I don't think any of these are the perfect fit for all scenarios. There's certainly still going to be some things which remain physical within your own premises. There are some things which you might be able to buy a SaaS solution for. And there are some things perhaps that you might be able to fit into a PaaS or an infrastructure as a service world. What you really need to be careful about as you look at the next 5 or 10 year journey for your company is making sure that you pick a vendor who has capabilities across all of these different 5 buckets to make sure that you've got that smooth, continuous experience for your IT. So if we start to delve a little bit deeper into each one of these, and I won't dwell on this too long, obviously when we're dealing with on-premises equipment, we're responsible for absolutely everything, right the way through from the networking all the way up to the applications. When we start to move into an infrastructure as a service world, we're starting to see some of that responsibility taken away from us. So no longer do we actually have to worry about the physical hardware that those virtual servers run on. All we have to focus on is everything above the operating system. As we get even more clever and we start to move into a platform as a service world, we'll actually see the vendors starting to take ownership of even more of that stack for us. So now we're not worrying about operating system, middleware or runtime. All we are doing is focusing on the applications and data. And then finally, in the software as a service world, you don't have to think about anything. It's all done for you. We spoke about economics earlier, and I particularly like this slide because it really sort of puts into context some of the things that we're talking about. If we look at the cost efficiencies, between running 100 servers and 100,000 servers, the costs fall dramatically. And there's a couple of different reasons for this. The first one, as we mentioned earlier, is if you're placing an order for 100,000 servers, you're probably going to get a fairly good deal on them. But I think the most important part of it and where we see the greatest savings is in the automation that has to go along with running that number of servers. People quite often ask me, this cloud thing, it's not new. We've had servers and data centers for ages. And I say yes, but the thing that is new is the fact that these data centers don't have people in them anymore. The fact that when I want something done, that's a piece of software which is actually doing that for me. We look at an average systems administrator. They might be able to manage between 100 and 1,000 servers in the old world. We look at cloud, and that exact same person is managing 100,000 or 500,000 servers because so much of their job is being done for them. The other thing which I think is interesting is the differences between public and private. Actually, if I ruled the world, I would probably ban the term private cloud because I think it's a bit of an oxymoron, because if you're actually owning and managing your own servers, it's not really a cloud solution. But you'll see here that whilst you can get some efficiencies with private cloud, the best efficiencies really want to really come about when you're looking at public cloud environments. So let's just spend a little bit of time getting familiar with Windows Azure. For those of you that don't know Azure, this is Microsoft's global hosting platform, delivered using a whole range of state-of-the-art data centers all around the world. There have been some fantastic innovations which Microsoft have made around things such as power efficiency, for example, and the investment that they've been making is in the billions. Each one of these data centers is positioned strategically around the world to make sure that your application is always available and always accessible to whichever users, wherever they happen to be in the world. One of the nice things is most of the services within Windows Azure include automatic geo-replication, and that's geo-replication within your control. So for us here in England, for instance, our two main data centers will be Dublin and Amsterdam, and everything that we do will automatically be replicated between those data centers. That's again one of the really important parts about cloud, is that you don't have to have a separate PR strategy anymore. Everything you do is highly available by default. Security is always the bone of contention whenever anybody talks about cloud. Actually, I quite often flip that back and say, well, what are you actually comparing it with? And are you really saying that your on-premises based environment is more secure than a state-of-the-art data center from somebody like Microsoft? And there are real financial backups to this. So Microsoft offers a full financially backed service level agreement. If they don't hit what they've said they'd hit, they will give you your money back. And finally, compliance and DR. Again, one of the major bugbears with cloud-based solutions, and we'll spend a little bit of time talking about some of the accreditations that the Microsoft data centers have to make sure that you've got that comfort that when your data is stored in the cloud, you're going to be protected from compliance issues. So if we look at the global makeup of the Windows Azure platform, we'll see there are 8 data centers around the world, 4 in Northern America, 2 in Europe, and 2 in Asia Pacific. One of the great things about these cloud platforms is that where I want to deploy my application is just one click of a button away. If I want to launch my application for Southeast Asian users, I don't have to have a separate hosting contract and a separate environment. I literally just select my application and say, please deploy this to Southeast Asia for me. On top of the 8 major facilities, we've also got 24 sub-facilities, and these are facilities where data can be stored locally to make sure that it's quickly accessible to your users, even if they're not physically proximate to one of the major facilities. So if we talk about what is the Microsoft difference, if you're choosing your cloud vendor, why do we think you should bet your house on Microsoft? And I think the reason is clear. And the reason is that cloud adoption is a process. Cloud adoption is not a decision that you will make overnight. What you need to do is you need to choose a vendor who has that symmetry between what they're doing in the public cloud within their own data centers and what you've got available to you today within your own infrastructure. So we look at this public and private cloud, and actually with the Microsoft vision, they are 2 parts of the same piece. They're not 2 separate worlds, and we can seamlessly move our workloads between them. And if we focus on 4 main areas that we want that symmetry across, the first one is identity. Any of you who are Microsoft-based organizations will almost certainly be running Active Directory as your identity management solution. The great thing about Microsoft's cloud platform is we have that exact same facility available both on-premise within your own infrastructure, but also within Windows Azure. So users can have single sign-on to their applications, whether they're accessing your local servers or whether they're accessing cloud-based servers. The second piece is virtualization. If we look at the Microsoft platform and we look at Windows Azure and we look at System Center, we've actually got exactly the same virtualization technology running behind the scenes. Windows Azure is actually just hundreds of thousands of Windows Server 2012 boxes running Hyper-V. What does this mean for you? Well, it means that you can seamlessly migrate your servers from on-premise to the cloud and then back again. The next piece, and one of the pieces which will become even more important in the next couple of years, is how do we manage all of these assets that we have? Again, some within our own data center, some within other vendors' data centers. And the great thing about Microsoft's vision is everything is built around System Center. If you haven't seen System Center, I definitely encourage you to have a look at it. The new version which has just come out is really a spectacular piece of software. But what we can now get is a single pane of glass and actually manage all of our servers wherever they might be. And then the final and most important piece, if you are actually developing and managing your own application, is that development experience. We shouldn't have to write applications in a different way depending on where we want to deploy them. And the great thing with Microsoft's platform is we can still use Visual Studio, we can still use .NET, we can deploy them into either environment. One of the things which surprises quite a lot of people is the extent to which Microsoft is now supporting open source frameworks as well. So there's a couple here, Java and PHP. There's a whole series of other ones which are supported as well, including Node.js. We've also got support for open source development environments such as Eclipse. The final piece in the puzzle to actually achieve this real hybrid cloud is how do we get these two worlds to talk to each other? And the great thing is we've got a whole series of different ways to achieve that, depending on what our particular requirements are. At the most basic level, we can have site-to-site VPNs, so we can securely connect your on-premises environment to your cloud environment, and your users will almost have no idea whether a server they are accessing is with you or with us. If you don't want to go the whole hog and publish your entire network to the cloud, we can also do point-to-point connectivity, so we can actually publish individual machines onto the cloud. If we start to move up the layer, and rather than talking about physical network connectivity, we might want to actually have connectivity at a service layer. So I might have a web service, I might have something that does something which I want to publish up to the cloud. Again, we've got a solution in there to allow you to do that without having to publish at the actual raw network level. And then finally, if your solution's based on SQL Server, we've got a range of capabilities to allow you to synchronize automatically your databases on-premise with the cloud, or also to synchronize between clouds or between data centers, all just a couple of clicks away. So we spoke earlier about compliance, and again I won't go into huge detail around these because these are some fairly hefty standards, but you'll see the current status, and the most important ones are ISO 27001, the bedrock of all data centers, and that's something which Microsoft has accreditation for both at the data center layer but also at the application platform layer. And the other one which is particularly important for us here are the EU model clauses. This is the most rigorous form of data protection which is available, and at the moment Microsoft is one of only a handful of cloud providers that actually supports that within their cloud hosting model. So I thought it'd be interesting just to share a few stats just to give you an idea of the size of this platform. At the moment there are over 100,000 customers live on Azure, and that number is doubling pretty much every 3 months at the moment. There is more compute capacity just within Azure than powered the entire planet in 1999. And in terms of data storage, there's over 10 megabytes for each person in China. I saw a stat recently that there are 4 trillion objects now in Windows Azure storage. It's just a mind-boggling amount of data. So we're now entering the slightly more technical part of the presentation, and I will try to avoid going too deep, but I thought it'd be useful just to give you an idea of what this thing actually is. So at a high level, as we said, Windows Azure is Microsoft's hosting platform. And there are 3 main ways that you can host your applications inside Windows Azure. At the most simplistic level, if you just have a website which you want to host, that website might be running on WordPress, it might be running on Joomla. We've now got the ability to be able to deploy that onto Windows Azure in sub 20 seconds. If we want to start to move up a layer, we mentioned earlier about infrastructure as a service. Within Azure, that's referred to as virtual machines, and it's hosting as we know it and love it. We can just go onto the portal, we can just ask for some servers, and 5 or 10 minutes later, they're available to us. The final piece is then cloud services. So this is the platform as a service. This is the logical evolution of where IT will get to in the next 5 or 10 years. But to be able to deploy across all 3 of these different worlds is really quite a special thing. So if we look at the layer cake of Azure, as we mentioned, these are some of the 4 key tenets of Azure. And it's worth mentioning as well that all of Microsoft's cloud platforms are delivered from the exact same data center that Microsoft services are. So you look at things such as Bing, you look at things such as Hotmail, you look at things such as Windows Live, they're all deployed within the same data centers. On top of the core infrastructure, we then have a series of capabilities available to us. We just talked a second ago about the compute ones, but we've also got some data management and networking ones as well, which I'll dig into in a bit more detail. And finally, sitting over the top of that, we have a whole series of services which we can start to hook into. I won't have time today to go into each one of these in detail, but if it's something that's of interest, we're more than happy to set up a follow-up session to dig deeper into each one of these. And then finally, sitting over the top of that, Azure is the most open cloud platform in the world. We can deploy using a whole range of different environments and languages. So as you mentioned, there are 3 ways to get started with Windows Azure. Cloud Services, which is the ultimate way to deploy your application, but could potentially require work to be done if it's an existing application. Virtual machines, where we can just stand up servers quickly and simply. We can upload our own virtual hard drive image, or we can use one of the pre-baked ones which Microsoft make available to us. We have full control of those virtual machines, but we also have full responsibility for managing them. And then at the other end of the scale are websites where we just want to quickly and simply stand up a new content management system. So Windows Azure Cloud Services, the platform as a service piece, we've got a couple of different roles, as they're called. I keep telling Microsoft to call them servers, but they insist on calling them roles. Effectively, is our application externally accessible, or is it something that we want to do in the background? And we can mix and match both of these kinds of roles to build up our particular application. The great thing about platform as a service over infrastructure as a service is that it will actually manage all of our software for us. So if we want to release a new version of our application, for instance, Microsoft will automatically take care of rolling that solution out for us. We don't need to log on to each machine to update it. It's also going to automatically check our machines in the background for us. So if there's an issue with one of them, perhaps one of them's gone down, one of them's unresponsive, Azure will automatically recycle that server for us. So we can actually have almost zero downtime because it's doing all of that proactive monitoring in the background for us. Virtual machines are when perhaps we can't let the platform have complete control of our applications, typically because they're legacy applications and they don't understand the concept that somebody else might be able to manage them other than a human. But also there are some scenarios where you just need that very, very fine-grained control of exactly what's happening on your machines. The nice thing about Azure, though, is that whether it's a cloud service or a virtual machine, we still have a lot of the same services available to us, such as free firewalls, such as free load balancing. We can have solutions which are made up of a combination of both cloud services and virtual machines, all from the same management portal, all with the same REST-based APIs, and all with the same scripting support so that we can automate our deployments and management. For any of you that have just fallen off your seat, please feel free to get back on. You did just see Linux on there. Very pleased to announce that Microsoft has just announced Linux support on Windows Azure. So whether your application is based on Microsoft platform or based on open source platform, we can now deploy those same virtual machines onto the Azure platform. Finally, the other nice thing about how the virtual machines work is your disk images are actually being read in real time off the centralized storage system. What that means is that the actual hard drive isn't running on the virtual instance. That means if that physical host fails, for instance, your hard drive is completely separate from that, completely intact, and automatically triple replicated and backed up as part of what Microsoft call blob storage, which we'll come on to in just a second. So if we look at some of the scenarios which are a good fit for virtual machines and some of the ones which are a good fit for cloud services, virtual machines are great if you want to migrate an existing application without touching it. They're great if we want to stand up test and development environments. They're great if we want to do backups or have this hybrid solution where we can move machines backwards and forwards to the cloud and on-premise. If you're looking at building a new application though, I would highly recommend you look at the cloud services because that's where you're going to see the greatest benefit from moving to the cloud. Windows Azure websites, another new function which Microsoft has made available recently, supports a whole range of open source content management solutions, supports the ability to upload your files using both FTP, Git or web deploy. We can automatically stand up databases to support those content management systems, and deploying something on this takes something like 10 to 20 seconds. It's really pretty impressive. So the next piece I want to just quickly go through some of the data management options which are available to you. So any of you who are using SQL Server on-premise today will love SQL Azure. SQL Azure is the ability to just stand up a database in exactly the same way that you would normally do. We mentioned earlier some of the synchronization options which are available to you to synchronize that data either between data centers or between environments. One of the other really nice things about SQL Azure though is that you're only charged based on the size of database that you use. High availability, fault tolerance and backup are all provided to you free of charge. And to give you a sense, a 10 gigabyte database, which if you were to provide all of the high availability, the servers, the SAN, the storage, everything like that, you could spend £15,000–20,000 on infrastructure quite easily. For that same 10 gigabyte database in Azure, you're looking about something like £30 a month. So it's unbelievable cost savings that you can get. And then the final piece are tables. So this is where we don't want to store relational data. We just need massive amounts of not very complex data. We've got a solution for that as well. As part of that, we have something called blob storage or file storage, as I call it, which effectively just allows you to store unlimited numbers of files. So drilling into SQL database, as we mentioned, we've got this high availability and fault tolerance for free. Every time we write a piece of data to SQL Azure, that data is automatically being stored for us 3 times. So we don't need to worry about backing up our data and making sure that it's highly available. Although the version of SQL that runs on Azure is not identical to the one that runs on-premise, it's very, very similar. That means if your applications today use SQL Server, to move them across to use SQL Azure is really a snitch. And it uses exactly the same protocols and exactly the same management tools which are available today. There's a whole variety of solutions which are supported within SQL Data Sync, as we've spoken about already. And this can be a great solution for improving performance or improving reliability. NoSQL is something which is becoming more and more popular, where we don't need that very, very rigid, structured relational database. The great thing about NoSQL is that it's much simpler to split these across multiple servers. So rather than having 3 physical servers, as you might have with SQL Azure, you can have that on 300 separate servers. It means that we can scale up our applications to much larger sizes. And then finally, blob storage or file storage. Think of it as an enormous hard drive in the cloud. We've got virtually unlimited storage space to put whatever we like at an eye-wateringly small amount of money. Everything within table storage and blob storage is all URI based, so everything's available using a set URL directly from your clients. And then finally, we spoke about some of these earlier, some of the connectivity options which are available either between Windows Azure environments or between Azure and your private environment. This can be used to extend your network and also to improve performance and reliability. Windows Azure Connect is the simplest way to publish your existing servers, and that's as simple as installing a small agent on the server that you want to connect to, and that server is then automatically available to whichever roles you give permission to. Virtual networking is where we step it up a level, and we actually want to provide complete site-to-site VPN functionality. To use Windows Azure Virtual Networking, you do need a hardware-based firewall, but if that's something that you don't have, there are some very entry-level options which are available to buy. This does require a little bit more networking know-how and configuration, but you do have full control over all of your addressing, so that you can make sure that all of your Azure servers are in exactly the same network address as all of your on-premises servers, so users have no idea where these servers are physically stored. And then the final piece, which sits over the top of this, which is one of my personal favourites, is the Windows Azure Traffic Manager. And what this allows you to do is to automatically direct your users to the closest proximate data center to them. So if they're based in Australia, they can automatically be sent to the Hong Kong or Singapore data centers. If they're based here, they'll automatically be sent to Dublin. So we can do that based on geographic location, but we can also do that to achieve high availability and fault tolerance. So if Azure detects that one of those data centers has gone offline for whatever reason, it will automatically route all of that traffic to a secondary data center to make sure that you can start to hit those 100% SLAs. So as I mentioned, there's an awful lot, and I could bore you for the next 3 hours talking about all of these things, but I will spare your sanity and move on and start to talk about some of the things that we're doing on top of the Azure platform and some of the things which we've done for other customers. So what we've done is we've put something together which we call Managed Hosting 2.0. And what we think is different about Managed Hosting 2.0 is we're taking a very different approach to how you go about deploying and managing your applications. Until now, if you wanted that Rolls-Royce service, you would have to work with a very, very expensive Tier 1 hosting provider. One of the great things about cloud is that we can actually take away a lot of the work that those hosting companies used to have to do and take away the armies of infrastructure experts who you'd have to speak to if you wanted anything done. And effectively, we've replaced them with software. So if I want a firewall change made, I don't have to phone up to speak to someone who, albeit is very helpful and takes half an hour to do it. I can now just log onto a website and I can do that and have it made available to me in 30 seconds. So it's a very different mindset, but the advantage of this are some of the cost effects or some of the cost savings that we're able to offer. We typically operate in the 80 to 90% savings bracket when compared with traditional Tier 1 managed hosting providers. So we've broken our offer up into 3 key areas. The first area we've called Hosting 2.0. You get a sense there's a little theme going on here. And Hosting 2.0 is all about the virtual machines and the cloud services, which we spoke about earlier. So I can now deploy my applications, I can deploy my servers at the click of a button. I'm only ever going to get charged for those servers based on the amount of time that I use them. That means if we want to switch servers off, if we want to switch servers on, that's absolutely fine, and there's no cost penalty to do that. And finally, we want to be able to deploy those applications anywhere in the world, so one of those 8 data centers that we saw earlier. The second part of the offer is all around storage. And we heard earlier about Windows Azure Blob or file storage. What we've done is we've built a whole range of solutions around that. So at the most simplistic level, we're offering cloud-attached storage. Think of this as a network share, but the network share is actually being stored on the cloud. We typically recommend cloud-attached storage for tiers 2 and 3 because the data is located away from your offices. There is some lag in terms of accessing it, but we're talking lag in the seconds. So for the vast majority of workloads, this can be a really cost-effective solution. Moving it up a layer, some of the applications and services that you require really do need that very, very high performance tier. So what we've done is we've partnered up with a company called StoreSimple. And StoreSimple actually provide a device which you can physically install on your premises and actually provides that local storage for files which you're accessing very often at lightning fast speed, but will then back up automatically all of the files which you're perhaps not accessing quite as regularly to the cloud. The great thing about StoreSimple is it really gives you that hybrid solution where you can have a small amount of storage on premise for the pieces that need it, but you can then take advantage of the very low cost storage in the cloud for everything else.
And it is supported 24/7 by remotely.
The final piece within the storage puzzle is cloud archive and backup. Any of you who are currently running tape backup solutions probably know how expensive and difficult they are to use. So again, we've partnered up with a couple of other companies, including Commvault, to put together some offers around how can we actually move all of that backup and archive onto Azure, but make sure that it's still readily accessible to you in the worst event. Finally, Dev and Test 2.0. If you're a company that employs developers, they can often be very demanding. When they want a development environment, they typically don't want to wait very long. So we've built an offer on top of Azure targeted at those particular solutions. As we mentioned, we can spin up and down development environments as we like. We're only ever charged for what we actually use. We've got support for Git, and we've also got support for Team Foundation Server, if any of you are using that. And using some of the networking components that we spoke about earlier, we can have those servers available to your developers without them actually having to go anywhere different.
I suppose, Dan, one other thing I was going to mention is the app fabric. So we are able to support bring your own devices in that environment.
Yep, so some of the networking components that we spoke about earlier are a great fit for bring your own devices. So allow your employees to consume applications and services using their mobile device, but without actually having to relax the security within your network. All of that data can all be published securely via the cloud.
And of course, with the new Windows Intune developments that are going to be ported into the cloud, that would enable us to manage those devices via the cloud, and we offer that service later on to our customers.
Exactly right, and Intune, interestingly enough, is just in the process of being moved to Windows Azure as well,
right.
as are most of Microsoft's other services, so they are definitely dog-fooding it with some fairly major properties at the moment. So, to support this, we've come up with a fairly bold claim, a fairly bold challenge, and I've gone all out on the PowerPoint. I've gone for the Zoom for this one. We're prepared today to offer any of you on the call to take the Windows Azure Challenge. And what we're offering is 50% off your current managed hosting, or we will write you out a check for £500. That's how confident we are that the savings that you can get as part of the Bytes Cloud Services, and we'd really encourage some of you to take up this offer. So who else is doing this? Just take a few minutes to chat through some of the customers that we've been working with and some of the successes that they've had moving to the cloud. And one that I particularly like is the Body Shop. So I'm sure most of you have probably heard of it or bought something from it for some birthday or occasion. Body Shop, global company, 2,400 stores across 63 countries. They were looking at how they could radically change their loyalty program and move away from a physical-based card to something which is a bit more 21st century, linking together both their on-premises stores and also their websites. So we've been working with the Body Shop now for a couple of years, and the thing that's particularly interesting about this case study is the hybrid deployment model. So the Body Shop are big Siebel users. They've got 20 or 30 Siebel servers on-premise that they weren't about to move to the cloud, but they wanted to start to publish some of the capabilities within Siebel out to their customers. So they went to Oracle and said, how would we go about doing this? And Oracle told them that they needed to invest in a whole brand new Siebel environment in a separate data center to make sure that it was always up. And I didn't see what the quote was, but it was definitely in the 7 figures. So then they came to us and said, well, we've heard of this cloud thing, perhaps that might be able to help us out. And what we've ended up doing is building all of their customer-facing functionality in Azure, but then using some of the networking stuff we spoke about earlier, securely publishing that to their on-premises Siebel environment. So they've got that best of both worlds where all of their very, very sensitive data stays in Siebel on-premise, but they can then publish that out in a highly available and fault-tolerant way to their 63 stores around the world. Mighty is another project that we've been working on for the last 12 months or so. Any of you who are not familiar with Mighty, they're an enormous facilities management company, something like 65,000 employees. We spoke about bring your own device. That was exactly what Mighty were trying to do. If you want to buy 65,000 Windows phones, that's probably going to cost quite a lot of money. So they thought, well, wouldn't it be great if we could actually use the devices that these people already own? But if we want to do that, we need to publish our functionality from SAP in a secure way. How can we go about doing that? And they've chosen to base all of their new HR management systems on Windows Azure. The great thing for them is that it was able to be provisioned very, very rapidly. It's very, very secure, and it's now been successfully in production for some 6 months. ASOS is another customer that we've been working with. The thing that was most interesting about ASOS was they were originally looking at just using Azure to provide peak burst capabilities. So if their on-premises environment got overloaded, they could then start to route some of that traffic out to Azure. Once they'd actually got their hands on the platform, once they'd actually started to move their website across, they quickly realized that there was no need to keep any of this existing on-premises environment, and they're now in the process of moving their entire public-facing website natively onto Azure and just using their on-premises environment for the actual purchasing piece. And any of you who run big online retail properties will know that 95% of the traffic is people browsing around. There's only 5% of it where there's actually any PCI compliant transaction which takes place. So to be able to push all of that out onto the cloud and to be able to provide that sort of scale up and scale down for seasonality was something that was really important to ASOS. And there's a number of other retailers that we're working with at the moment to help them move their websites into the cloud. Aviva is a project that we've just finished up recently. I'm sure some of you have heard some of the advances which are going on at the moment in terms of linking your insurance premium to how well you drive. One of the challenges with these is that you actually have to install a physical black box into your car. This is obviously quite expensive, but it also raises some fairly scary privacy concerns. So Aviva is attacking this from a slightly different angle, and they thought, well, actually, we've got a device that everybody has already. It's called their phone. Why don't we try and install some software on that which hooks into the GPS, to the accelerometer, and can actually provide that same monitoring of what's going on, but without the privacy invasion that comes from installing that black box. Obviously, the challenge for them is that this is initially going to launch with 80,000 drivers. It could easily be 800,000 drivers within 12 months. So they're really keen to work with a platform that could scale up to meet that demand, but also one that was highly available and would never go down. The great thing as far as Aviva is concerned as well is this is a really hip, really cool project for them to do, and one that if they'd have tried to do with their internal IT, it still wouldn't even be off the drawing board. This one is a personal favourite of mine. We've been working with McLaren now for about 3 or 6 months, and the challenge that Formula One faces are the margins of error are so small that the tiniest difference can make all of the difference. I heard an interesting stat that each 0.1 second advantage around a track costs something like $100,000 in research and development. The science and engineering that these guys do is absolutely mind-boggling. One of the particular pieces they do is a lot of mathematical modelling. So trying new bumpers, trying new spoilers, tweaking the angles of attack, tweaking the tyres. And what they wanted to be able to do was actually to run simulations of these cars racing around all the different tracks. Before they came to us, their cloud computing solution was 6 laptops in a cupboard. Once we'd helped move that solution onto Azure, they can now run an almost infinite number of simulations, and it could be all the difference between winning and not winning this season. Another project which we've completed recently was for the Met Office. Some of you might have seen some of the things in the news around open data and around publishing as much government data as possible. One of the first data sets which was published was from the Met Office. All of that data is being published in real time from the Met Office out to hundreds of thousands of users around the world. Again, key decision criteria for the Cabinet Office was making sure that it was a highly available platform and making sure that that data was always available. So with that, I'm going to throw it open to some questions.
Right. I'm just looking through the few questions that people were asking during the conference call. There are 3 of them. One of them is about licensing. What they're actually asking is that if they move their platform to the Azure cloud or to our hosting platform, what are the licensing implications?
So there's a couple of different answers to this question. First of all, there is the licensing of the Windows components on the actual servers themselves. All of the Windows licensing fees are included within the actual hosting costs, so there's no cost for Windows licenses. If customers are interested in using SQL Azure and some of the managed database platforms, again, all of the SQL licensing costs are included within that cost. There's no separate requirement for licensing. If you want to run your own software on top of the virtual machines, such as SharePoint, for instance, you've got license portability, so you can take those licenses which you've got on-premise and you can then deploy them onto Azure, or you can also rent those licenses monthly using something called SPLA.
Okay, so licensing mobility really applies to that in many cases.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the other thing that somebody was asking is that they've seen some what they call pay-as-you-go pricing on the website. And I suppose they were asking what are the benefits of pay-as-you-go pricing versus going to our hosting platform, and what are their drawbacks. And do you have a view on that? I wonder.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, I think this is one of the common misconceptions of cloud, is that when you sign up for a cloud provider, you're writing a blank check because of the scalability that it offers. The reality is that you are charged for whatever servers you have deployed. If you want to scale up and scale down, that's absolutely fine. But also, if you want to keep a steady number of servers, then you know almost to the penny exactly what those servers are going to cost you. So it's absolutely not a blank check. And if you want to take an absolute worst case, look at doubling your infrastructure and what would the cost of that be. But it's certainly not, an infinite amount of money. You can very accurately predict what your costs will be when you're using the cloud.
And I suppose another thing I was going to add is that through our billing, we provide itemized billing, and the customers can see how much they consume. Also, being proactive, if they have taken the online support from us, we can be proactive to warn them if a dev and test environment has been spun up but it hasn't been used, that they are paying for that so they can spin it down. So we can give a proactive service and avoid this infinite amount of money being spent on something you don't use. One final question, which has come up quite a lot of times really. Customers are saying that 2 things really: how do they get their data up into the cloud, and if at in a year or 2 time, if they decide that they want to move back on-prem, how does this happen? What are the difficulties? How can they do it really?
Yeah, so I mean, I think one of the key parts to that is to make sure that your cloud vendor supports open standards. So for Azure, for instance, everything, all of the data is available using open protocols such as REST, such as OData. If you're using SQL Server, using the Open SQL protocol. So there shouldn't ever really be any concerns in terms of having your data locked into a platform such as Azure. There are certain other cloud providers out there where your data is locked in, so it is a very valid question and something which you do need to be careful of, but you know, happy to report that with Microsoft's cloud platform you wouldn't ever get this data lock-in. One of the other questions which I thought it might just be worth covering, because it's one that I get asked quite a lot, is how does the Patriot Act fit into cloud services, and will the FBI be able to rock up and start stealing your data at the drop of a hat? This is, to be honest, one of the biggest red herrings around cloud. The Patriot Act, for those of you who don't know, is something which is was brought in under the sort of auspices of anti-terrorism and does give the FBI access to certain data when certain due process has been undertaken. What a lot of people don't know is that they were almost identical provisions available before the Patriot Act came out. Actually, the Patriot Act has tightened up how you go about getting that information. There's actually now a full court process which needs to be gone through before any of that data is released, whereas in the old world it was just you know, a back call from Washington to London and then the servers were swiftly released. So the Patriot Act is not something that I think customers should overly concern themselves with, because it offers no new powers, and it's something, to be honest, that it's almost impossible to avoid now. If you look at any of the tier 1 hosting providers, they all have operations in the United States, whether you're using cloud, not cloud. They're all subject to those same requirements, unless you choose, you know, a very, very small, only UK-based hosting provider. But even in that situation, then they will just revert back to the old means, which is actually perhaps easier to get than via the Patriot Act.
And also there's a corresponding EU Act anyway, which the European Union can dictate to view the data. Should they require it. So, okay, any other questions? So we open the mic, unmute if, can we do that? So I believe audio is now available. I don't know if anybody has any questions.
Unbelievably good job of explaining it.
So again, thank you very much, Dan, for your contribution, and thank you very much for all of you attending the web session. We'll publish the webinar, the recording, as well as the slides later on, and we would really appreciate it if you can submit your questionnaire, and if you have any questions, please direct them either to myself or Dan, and we'll be happy to respond. And once again, thank you very much for attending.
Thank you.